Welcome to Cartoonist Kayfabe, Talk and Shoot, Volume 3. I'm Ed Piskor.
I'm Jim Rugg.
And I'm Tom Scholey.
Jimmy, what week is it, man?
September 24th.
The first fall episode of Talk and Shoot. Fellas, let's debrief the Brian Ball and Shoot interview a little bit. Tom, you get a chance to check that thing out?
Yeah, I loved it. It was great.
Pull some gems?
Yeah, as always. Yeah, and we had read like a Boland interview and like, you know, considered making an episode. We ended up not putting that episode together, but it kind of was like a good primer, gave me like some context for like, you know, his career and the thing. And just like when he would talk about the actress and the bishop, and like I really related to, you know, where he was coming from with that, where it's like you do your DC stuff or whatever, and everybody knows Batman, everybody knows Robin, but then you do your creator-owned stuff, and you got to now introduce the world to these characters. They don't have that like built-in familiarity, and so his way around that was figuring out like these sort of, these sort of like dirty joke character. You know, it'd be like doing a comic about Dirty Johnny or something. You know, like and the actress and the bishop, which are like these kind of characters, and so like that thing was pretty like informative to me. Like there's these little things that don't belong to anybody, that are like sort of folk, you know, characters, and if you can figure out one that's not been done to death, like Dracula or, you know, Frankenstein or whoever.
It's interesting hearing him talk about that stuff now. Like he has new actress and bishop stories in progress and stuff, and no outlet for them. Post them on Facebook whenever he does them. It's so different to me to think that way, because I'm always thinking like, okay, this thing I'm working on, how do I publish this? How do I get it out there? What's the best format for it? All this stuff. And he's, I guess, coming from this other place, you know, working for DC, working within a system. And at this point, it's sort of like, he's not going to start self-publishing now, but it's such a different approach to making comics with not like the final destination in mind.
He named a couple names per his like kind of inspirations, getting in the game, developing his drawing chops and stuff. And he mentioned he called him Jesus, but I'm pretty sure it's Jesus Blasco. I don't know if you Googled this character's name. I did not. Dude, it is a missing link to get to Bolland with this guy's stuff, down to some of the compositional elements too. But it's that kind of realistic drawing style with good solid blacks. The characters are built very similarly. It's just like whatever Brian brings to the table that's extra, like that's the difference. You know what I mean? But the same basic fundamentals and foundation is visible in his Jesus Blasco guy who did a comic called Steel Claw.
Oh, I know Steel Claw.
Which was, you know, in those like Fleetway, Gateway comic. You could get reprints of that pretty easily in the dollar bins and stuff, man. But worth a look.
He pulled out the artwork from like age 14 and it looked immaculate, like perfect, clean, beautiful.
We got to break kayfabe a little bit, because what happens is the way Zoom works is we chime in and say stuff, the camera will go on us, man, and then you won't see what the image is. And I say that because he was showing the shit that was amazing, and we had to no-sell that.
Right, you couldn't applaud or like, you know.
Because we did this remotely. We weren't together. You were at your place, I was at my place. We had to do it on a different day. And I just imagine you biting your tongue the same way I was biting mine. Because you're like, holy fuck. You did that? Because it looked professional. It didn't look like Carmine Infantino, but it looked like Frank Robbins or somebody.
Yeah, it blew me away. And then, of course, he pulls out real original art. That's the other thing that, I mean, that's some of the best looking original art I've ever seen in person, especially the color pieces. I can't believe like a human hand makes that stuff because of how perfect it is. But it makes me think, like, we talked a lot about process, and he makes that transition to digital early, you know, in late 90s. And I don't think anybody realized it. Like, as fans looking at it, and it's that thing that I get back to all the time about, like, the tools just don't matter.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, give Boland whatever tool you want to pull out of the desk or a stylus or whatever, and he's going to make something that looks amazing.
And he proved it by showing those Tank Girl pieces that the color treatment looked the exact same as the stuff that he did digitally, that he does digitally. Has all the same kind of noise, has all the same kind of values. Seeing those originals, and you just heard the tracing paper over top, so he he presents it in a professional, like Mad Men, fucking illustrator type style, the way that you're taught, right? It made me think about because he was talking about there's a lot of it's a multimedia mixed media piece of artwork to get the different things that he needs for that piece. So there's the Union Jack flag that has to have like a solid color and a certain kind of poppy color. So, you know, he went with like acrylics for that or whatever. And it reminded me of those classes that you would take in, like design courses that felt like bullshit busy work when you were doing it. Make a grayscale with ink wash or something, and I don't want to see a brush stroke. Make a color wheel, and I don't want to see a brush stroke. Perfect flat color. And you're like, what the... Why do I got to do this shit, man? This guy's being a taskmaster. This dude is just making us do busy work. This is washing dishes. You know, they're like, I didn't get into art for this. Bullshit. Because you see that stuff, and that's a guy who took those components seriously.
One caveat. He made those covers in the early to mid 90s. I was doing those color squares in the late 90s.
Right.
It was bullshit by then.
Yeah. but it's not if you want to do practical artwork, not fucking Photoshop bullshit that you could Control Z all day and all of that. If you want to do that sort of thing on a piece of paper, on a piece of board, you got to have those fundamentals down.
Oh man, the skill set on display with those pieces.
And once again, we had to no-sell that for a minute, and he's like, "Oh, is it showing up?" And you just want to cry because you want to say it's totally showing up. But you don't want the camera to come on you and miss out a couple seconds extra of actually looking at that stuff. One of my regrets in a conversation I actually emailed him, and I think I do have a reply, was about the black line of those images. Did you ink this thing first and sort of, you know, color over top? If you take a look at the printed covers, you will see it's not a black ink line. Like, there is color over top of that stuff, and it's beautiful. It smooths it out. It's like underpainting or something. Like the color pigments of like gouache or the airbrush or whatever, it bleeds over the line, but you still see it, but it's not a black line any longer. It's kind of like a sepia holding line or something, or, you know, just like a darker value of whatever color, you know, that object is or whatnot. So another cool little piece of insight.
I enjoyed him talking about like Jim Woodring and Charles Burns' work. I really enjoy artists like that when we interview them, whenever they pull out some artists and talk about them, especially if it's a little surprising to me who they're referencing. But I just like to hear an artist talk about the other artists they like and what they like about their work. And Burns and Woodring, man, Bolin can tell me about them all day.
So funny that he bristled, and maybe there's some like transatlantic semantic issue going on, but precision was what we kind of described as all of their common grounds that made sense. It makes sense that a Brian Bolin digs Jim Woodring and a Charles Burns because of these like mechanically stamped out illustrations, and he bristled at that. He said, "You don't think that a Jim Woodring is precise, do you? You think that's bonkers." And
I think of all the parallel lines that Woodring has in his Frank backgrounds.
I think if you're Brian Boland, then nobody looks precise to you.
Maybe.
You know?
What precision is to him, because this also piggybacks off of him expressing that he wasn't into Kirby. So like what precise is to him, in my mind, is like naturalistic. I know which bone, like how long the femur is, and exactly how the muscles wrap around there, and what the knee looks like underneath. And I could tell a badly drawn knee from a well drawn one. I think it was Fife. Michel Fife. He put it up on social media, so it's not like a private thing. He watched like one of those Kirby documentaries that's floating around on YouTube, and was bristling at the guys who were kind of talking smack on the anatomical drawing. You could watch the documentary. Who are those guys? It's Neil Adams. It's Jim Lee. It's people who place value in the sort of accuracy, even though Jim Lee, there's some kayfabe musculature happening and stuff like that. But the root is kind of in being authentic or something. And I think that Bolland is in that kind of category. Certainly with the Kirby energy. It's like...
Since it's becoming my thing to bring Toth up in every conversation that we have... It reminds me of the story of Toth and Kirby getting lunch together whenever I think Kirby had moved to California and they knew of each other. They were the two best cartoonists, so they went over for a cookout. And Toth describes it as he talked to Kirby about how he makes comics for half an hour, and then Kirby explained to him how he makes comics for a half an hour. Toth didn't understand anything that Kirby said, and he said he didn't think Kirby understood anything that he said in terms of how they work. But it is like weird language, you know. We've had this, Tom. I remember describing something once as ambitious, which I meant as a compliment. And you sort of took as like that's not a compliment.
That your reach exceeded your grasp or
You
something. Maybe?
gave it the college try, but
Yeah,
you
right.
failed.
Yeah.
I'm in the Tom category there too, by the way.
Man, in my head, I was like, "You're doing something nobody's ever tried to do before." It's amazing. But yeah, I think about that kind of stuff a lot. This idea that like I think we struggle to communicate these ideas. Like when you're describing what makes that cover or that line or that artist special, I don't know. We all see different things to start with, and then once you start to grasp like undefined vocabulary on top of it, good luck.
Yeah, then we all are people who sit alone in our own rooms, drawing all day
Exactly.
and have our own ideas.
Having these conversations play in my head. Do you know that story, the Toth Kirby story?
Yeah, I do know that story, and I mean, I just think of like Toth. You look at his handwriting, like he has his own peculiar language and his own calligraphy, his own alphabet. You know what I mean? And then Kirby has like nobody on earth talks like Kirby. Like Kirby is like Yoda, or his sentences are backwards. His like he was just a very poor, either like a poor or great verbal communicator. And it's like the reason he makes these comics is because he couldn't communicate what's inside of him in any other way other than like sitting down and drawing like elaborate pictures of it, which I think we can all relate to some degree. So I'm not shocked at all that those two in particular did not vibe.
Right.
I like that you asked the question about like what does he consider himself? Like, are you a
I was
cartoonist
just
or
going to
whatever?
bring this
Yeah.
up.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's interesting that he sees himself as an illustrator. We all know him, of course, as a great cover artist. I think that's even in the title of the video. But like in my mind, like single illustrations, there is a school of cartooning that is like that. Ralph Steadman. There's a million of these guys, and I'm surprised he doesn't view himself through that lens a little bit, because I do think he's extraordinary with these single images. But there is exaggeration and fantasy and composition and all those elements that really make it sort of a cartoon. So I was surprised that he. That's another one of those language things. You know?
Yeah, probably because from his perspective, it's probably like, oh, well, like a comic, like a panel-to-panel thing, that's storytelling, and then this is something else. And he's like sort of completely, like, or almost completely moved out of that realm, at least in terms of like the stuff we're seeing. Like, it's been a long time since we've seen like, but we keep seeing these covers one after the other. But like the things you're talking about, that tradition of like this cover that tells a story, that is an older tradition. That's a default thing, but it's not like that's not the larger value that like that the world there's much less of like that's like very specific to the history of illustration and not specific to like art, with a capital A.
Yeah, in fact, a lot of times like capital A art like would dismiss that if it wasn't
anything figurative,
from the Renaissance or
anything
something.
figurative, anything that's naturalistic, anything that's describing some other reality other than the reality of this paint that you're looking at the moment.
It was fun, sort of in the same breath as like the Jim Woodring, Charles Burns stuff, which makes a lot of sense. That he would sort of dig that kind of stuff because of the precision. Asking him about the musical stuff, like I was kind of trying to crack the code, but we didn't just get into it that deep. But these groups and these bands that were mentioned are just super avant-garde, super out there, playing with the William S. Burroughs cut-up technique in audio format, and it's completely divorced from what we see on the page from him. And I do think that it's interesting that there's like that side of his brain that would go with the avant-garde in that way, because it's just there's no evidence of it on the page.
Well, if you're like an analytical person, I mean, like our connection to music is like largely emotional, so there isn't like so it is almost like it resides in just a completely separate part of his brain. And then there's also the thing, sometimes like you love your opposite, so it's like you're like a very precise, constrained kind of person, and then you love things that seem to be unleashed and unhinged. Like I just think of that kind of music he's into. It's like, you know, like it's
Yeah,
just this
totally.
like insane, and it's like that's like, you know, you just see him working, and you picture like classical music playing, and then you like zoom into his brain, and you're
Also thinking about like his interest in like Silver Age DC, the importance of that. And I do think we mentioned it in the conversation, but like sort of the opposite, but still with the same inspiration. It's like a Dan Clowes, like
Yeah.
chasing the clean line, but using it to different effects. Like Brian Bolland like is more about drawing something cool, you know, and getting the lighting right and stuff like that. Where Clowes' version is just it's more inward and more about communicating ideas rather than just selling you on an intense visual, but still coming from the same soup.
him talking about his love of like the Silver Age and Golden Age DC stuff was like the least surprising thing to come out. Like that makes so much sense, you know, especially like because you would imagine that maybe like, oh, him drawing all these pictures of the Justice Society and stuff is like him slumming it, but it's like that's like where he came from, you know.
Sure.
Makes you think about the old stories about you know, comics as ballast, like going across the pond and stuff, and the lack of distribution that Marvel had. So like if we couldn't have got good Marvel comics in Pittsburgh, you think you're getting them shits in the UK? So I wonder if the story would be different if Marvel didn't have to rely on distribution back in those days. Like, would those guys have the same reverence for like Spider-Man and all that stuff if they just had access to those comics at the same formative period that they had, you know, that those Flash
Yeah,
comics?
I mean, because you talk to the guys of that generation who did get their hands on that stuff as ballast, and it like, you know, blew their minds, you know.
I think a lot of that stuff's age based. You know, it's as we meet cartoonists and stuff. If you're my age, we have a ton in common.
Yeah.
It's almost like we speak
Yeah.
the same language, and I think that applies to everything. Like whatever music you heard when you're 14 or
Yeah.
whenever you're 18, like there are these impressionable times, and it's almost like whatever happened to be in front of you or around you or you found, it just that's the time to get it.
But I think what I'm saying is at that time that they got their DC things, I don't know that they even had the opportunity
Right,
to
Might have
see,
been
to
just
see
a
the
couple
Marvel
years
stuff.
too old to get that. Yeah, I mean, like our generation, like we love the 70s Kirby stuff, and like our relationship with the 70s Kirby stuff is completely different from like somebody who's just, you know, a few years older than us, you know?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, the it's also fun for me now. Like I think about Gil Kane as being like this center point, and Bolin comes out, and Dave
Yeah.
Gibbon comes out, and in a weird way, Dan Clowes, you can sort of connect some dot there. And then I think of like Gary Groth telling us about Gil Kane and how Gil Kane was sort of unhappy with, you know, the artist that he was in certain ways.
We unpacked that one great interview from one of the most iconic Comics Journal covers that I ever remember seeing in the back when you would get your Comics Journal and they'd be selling old issues, and it's like it's a jam cover, Robert Crumb, Gil Kane on the same page at some Dallas Fantasy Fair with Gary Groth moderating the conversation. We unpack this conversation, and Gil Kane, tremendously self-aware, very humble, very knowledgeable of his limitations as an artist, and being very open about not achieving what he's wanted to in his career, and really praising Robert Crumb for being able to get the it out on the page, communicate real ideas rather than the pulp stuff. Now, this is that area where I don't know if it was on the episode that we just recorded or not, but we're talking about the sort of baggage that comes from having thousands of comics at your disposal growing up. I think that was on
Yeah,
our
bad
last...
habits and stuff.
Yeah,
that's in
yeah.
our previous video.
Gil Kane came from pulp, and in those conversations he mentioned, like, you know, the stuff that he dug, it was the adventure strip Sundays and stuff that can only get you so far if that's like the bulk of like the visuals that you're looking at when you go into an endeavor. And Crumb was pulling from people like, you know, going way back to the illustrators of like Victorian times and Wyeth and Pyle and all these guys, and it just and searching for like old blues music and stuff, like just bringing way more of the outside culture into your practice than just the pulp stuff that got you excited initially to give it a go.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. Whenever you have these cartoonists who are huge influences, you are subject to their limitations too.
Yeah.
And maybe you identify those and you go outside of them to find solutions, but depending on when you're internalizing that, maybe not. Maybe it's almost passed down from generation to generation, some of these same shortcomings, probably peaking in 90s comics where everybody seemed to be learning to draw comics from comics.
Yeah.
And you see anatomy breaking down and storytelling breaking down and all these things that are just the result of, inbreeding influence kind of reaching an apex there.
Like this is kind of like not what the show's about, but it was like interesting hearing him talk about The Killing Joke, just come from like a fan perspective. Again, like I guess like you didn't go too deep with like the color choices, like that was just hit to change the color, like and take the yellow off the bat and stuff, which again I guess goes back to his like, that's not my Batman.
Right.
That's not the Batman he grew up with the yellow. Even though like you think about like that, like I can't think of a time prior, like that's how I always knew Batman was with that yellow thing. But hearing his perspective on it, because anytime Alan Moore or Brian Boland talk about The Killing Joke, they're very dismissive of it.
Well, not they.
Okay.
Alan Moore.
Alan Moore is because I thought maybe he was too, but he gave a bit of information that I haven't heard him talk about in other interviews, where he said that that when he got the script, he felt like it was a bit much. Like, what are we doing to poor Batgirl? Where again, coming from that sort of DC, fan kind of thing, so that like I'd never heard that bit of information before, that it was maybe too much even for the artist who's rendering this thing.
Interesting to know that there was like a little piece of artwork that's floating around out there that like didn't make the cut, because like when you and I did that video about The Killing Joke, somebody reasonably knowledgeable, like
and you
like,
mentioned it to him, that there's this story, that there's this whole other thing.
That's such a classic of like there's a small piece of art that didn't make it or
Right.
got edited, and it balloons into like
Turns into a
pages
game of telephone.
and pages that like this guy had seen.
I still implore everybody to draw what's outside the panel whenever you see a naked James Gordon cropped off at the butt cheeks or whatever. What's happening on the other side of that panel board? Finish those illustrations. I have some ideas about that. Share them off camera.
I was going to say that'd be a very popular social media post, Ed, if you fill in that margin.
The haters are watching.
Well, that could be like the little kayfabe booklet that you hand out. There's like a page where it's like mostly just white paper, and then in the corner is the Jim Gordon illustration
book
that you finish. Yeah.
Yes. I am on my final page of my mystery project.
Yeah, what is it?
It is coming soon. I'm so excited to wrap this thing up. Probably next week will be the time to start talking about that. But it's been hanging over my head for so long, like to see that end in sight, and also like I'm trying to stick the ending.
Yes.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like I started working on this page yesterday, and it's been a little bit slow going. And I just say, it's all right. I'll finish it by Saturday. But I need it to get, I need this part to be right. And I'm pretty happy with where it's at.
What color backdrop do we need to buy? Like, what color fabrics do we need to buy for the backdrop for the Jim Rugg shoot interview where we make the announcement? Is that too much?
That is a lot. Yeah. I'm not gonna give any
You're
of
not
that
going to
away.
give the colors?
But I'll tell you this: my page ends with stark white.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's
a
no
good way
clue
to
at all.
end. That's a good way to end. You haven't asked, but I have some thoughts about how to end it. But you haven't asked, so I'm not going to volunteer.
But I'm pretty excited to move into that next stage, of like putting the book together will be the thing that follows. Always exciting. And also, I'm not sure when the announcement will come, but it is on a schedule now. So we are moving in that direction. So I'm sure in the coming weeks, there'll be more and more details coming out here. But I am in that mindset of like, one, I cannot wait to get back to my drawing board, which is a great feeling. But also it'll just be a different experience once that page is done, and then it becomes, editing and design. And
it's an interesting moment, because it is like almost euphoric when you can see the end in sight. You're almost done, and then when you're done, you're still in that panic mode, but you're done. But you're still, and so it's like, do I need to redraw the last page? Maybe like you kind of like changing gears into like relief.
Yeah, it's a different part of the process, so that'll be exciting.
Do you already have like your next ideas in mind?
I do think I know my next book
Yeah.
after that. And I mean, I'm happy to talk about that. I don't
Yeah.
know if this is a place to, this isn't really an announcement because it's just an idea, but I think I'm going to do a notebook collection. You know, all of those notebook drawings, people love them. They've been out of print. They were small quantities to begin with. So I've actually, like the one big wrinkle in that is there's a designer that put together The Strange Death of Alex Raymond. And I'm planning to talk to him because that book is printed better than any comic I've ever seen in my life. And I want to know exactly how that is achieved. I don't know if that's a scanning thing, a scanner, some print setting, whatever it is. But like in my mind, it's like, okay, if I'm going to do a notebook, you know, ballpoint pen collection of drawings, I want to reproduce those better than I ever have. And so that's where I'm at right now. Is one is starting to think about making the book because I'll probably make it myself. But then also like figuring out how to best make it.
This is very cool because I don't have either of the notebook drawing things, and I know that the audience, whenever they see those things on when you're showing them off at the front of the videos, a lot of people are looking for those things. But so that book's going to be huge.
That's the plan, and it'll be a lot of drawing. You know, it'll sort of be like while I'm putting together this book that I'm finishing up comics wise, it'll be something I can go in and out of. You know, making a drawing a day
cleanser.
is very different than like writing a graphic novel
Yes.
and trying to draw it and make it all make sense.
In a lot of ways, man, like those notebook drawings are like more you than any of your comics. Like the comics are far more escapist than like every page of your notebook drawings makes sense to me.
That tends to be the case in like artists who keep a notebook or whatever. Their notebook stuff is just like a completely different animal, and in many cases the preferable thing of it's just how do you channel this like raw magic into a disciplined ongoing project that has a narrative through line. Pretty tricky, and some people eventually get to a point where they get pretty close between the two, but it's a trick. You know,
It's a
trick.
different mindset for
Yeah.
sure. You know, like whenever I started doing those notebook drawings, I had been working a ton, and it was like clear off one day a week and then draw whatever I feel like that day. And that's such a different approach than, you know, we make comics. Like, it's not what you want to draw, it's what serves the story
Yes,
on that
yeah.
page. And it's a very different thing to wake up and be like, what do I want to draw today?
Yeah, that's rad, man.
Once you finish Red Room Ed, I'm probably going to be like, you should do some drawings for a month.
Yeah.
Just give yourself the freedom to have fun, because it's a kid mindset. That was the other thing that it was
Yes.
for me, was like after doing a lot of work that was art, or a lot of art that was work, you know, it was for some purpose. This was totally different. This was really like when I'm a kid, you know, drinking a bunch of Mountain Dews and watching Up All Night and just drawing some stupid barbarian thing. That's what this was, and it felt that way. Like, it felt good. So
Rhonda Shear or Gilbert Gottfried?
both.
Okay.
I celebrate all of the Up All Night.
The real answer is Joe Bob Briggs from DNT Monster Vision, but we'll let that slide, man. I want to make just a quick announcement that we're prepping the Red Room trade paperback, which everybody who's
Speaking of
supported-
book design, this is exciting. Let's
yeah,
let's
super
hear about
fun.
it.
So you want to make, first off, different audiences, some with some potential overlap. Venn diagram, no doubt. For the people who grabbed the issues, there's so much extra stuff that we're putting into the trade paperback. I think there's probably something like 120 pages worth of comics. The free comic book day is not going to be in this one. It's issues 1 through 4 of the Antisocial Network. The book is clocking in at 208 pages to just give you some idea into the extras, that the amount of extras that are going to be in this trade paperback. Drew a lot of extra imagery as like sort of bumpers for the chapter breaks and stuff like that. A lot of cool atrocities were drawn. Go to my Instagram, dig a little deep, you'll see them.
Beautiful violence.
Yes.
Well, you know, those like when we were looking at Sin City, the issues versus the collections, a lot of opportunity to kind of pause and extend some beats. And,
Absolutely, man. Didn't mess with the storytelling flow that much, but added a lot of extra finished like Red Room art, showing off character designs. Did like director's commentary tracks for the entire book to just kind of explain some of the process, some of like where my head was at with some of that stuff. I almost felt obligated to do that because
disclaimer.
because of just like just some of the wild stuff that's inside those pages. But on the weeklies that we were doing, it's no secret you and I took these screenwriting courses, and when we were doing that, I worked out like 100-page version of what Red Room was gonna be like at that moment, and I drew the complete comic in a quick and dirty fashion on typing paper, and 100 pages worth of stuff that is legible. You could read it. Like, it's a little it's hand drawn, written and really fast, but the storytelling is there in like a kind of a thumbnail state. All the words are that you could read this comic, and I'm going to be serializing that through the trades, because there's going to be 3 trades. So like the first third of it is going to be in trade paperback number 1, 32-page, 33-page story that is far different than what Red Room became. I think when we were doing the screenwriting courses, and you know what, Jim, you're going to get the credit for this, because I was thinking a lot of like theater of the mind for this idea, and it was actually, that first draft was more of like a serial killer story than like a Red Room thing. And he was like, and he's not sitting right here.
Like I'm not even here.
and you were like, but the Red Room is the thing. Like that's what the people are watching, and you're not going to like show any of that. So I give all credit to Jim Rugg.
Wow, Jim Rugg, creator of Red Room.
yeah. For all of the, because like just saying that, it just gave me free. Like I just felt like a lot of freedom, and then you could play with, what the actual visuals would be, and it actually changed the entire thing into sort of what it is. And it's still this ever evolving thing. Man, the story I'm working on now is a mixture of like Wicker Man, Shirley Jackson's The Lottery, all kinds of weird stuff like mashed up into one, and it's a far out story that like you wouldn't think, it doesn't fit in so comfortably with the other comics, but it totally fits into the universe. I can't wait to show that
fits
off.
into the Red Room.
Yeah.
Pat Mills, man, that I think about his interview all the time whenever he was like, it's the name of the thing, like the book should be the name of the main thing. And it's funny, like I always see book titles now, and I think that like it'll be something tangentially related or hard to understand, and I think like, you guys didn't listen to Pat Mills.
Star Wars. And I love that like rapid prototyping you're talking about of drawing.
I learned that, and I learned that from you.
Okay, because I'm a big believer in that. Like it's really good.
What I saw from you was like at least a year's worth of fucking around in sketchbook, like filling up sketchbooks before you did Transformers G.I. Joe. And just dropping ideas out of your head. We got lunch every week, man, and you would just like, there would be 20, 30 more pages filled up in those books, and who knows what the percentage of ideas actually made it to the final boards compared to like what's in those books. But I got a lot out of that, out of seeing you.
And I still managed to publish a lot of that stuff, like as back matter. A lot of that raw stuff made it into the final thing. And I'm doing that right now with my my secret project. I'm in that stage now where I'm just like, except I'm filling up my iPad with pages of like, just like a fun, like off the rails kind of comic that will, maybe become something more disciplined as it goes on. Or maybe this undisciplined version is exactly perfect,
Yeah, time will tell.
I like that you're including that draft. I think that's really exciting to see. I know a lot of kids read Red Room, and if they're aspiring comic creators, it really shows how much more work goes into one of these stories. What you see on that finished printed page is often a very small part of what goes into the actual creation of that page.
It's going to come out early November, like November 9th, something like that, man. But listen, guys, we're clocking in at about a half an hour, and we did a lot of recording today with lots more to do. So, Kayfabers, like, follow, subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit the bell. We'll notify you when new vids are available. Jimmy, what's out there?
Patreon.com/JimRugg, where you can download out-of-print zines and mini-comics. You can see how I make comics like Street Angel, Deadliest Girl Alive, and Octobriana, and a lot more. Patreon.com/JimRugg.
You got Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics, fantastic 4 grand design. American Barbarian, Godland, Transformers vs. G.I. Joe, GoBots, all kinds of stuff out there from me. And I have a YouTube channel, Total Recall Show.
Red Room Comics, go get them while they're hot, man. They're going fast and furious at the comic shop, so scoop up those issues. The trade paperback is like November 9th. Make sure you put that on your subscriber list. Get the shops to order that thing for you. It's going to be on different paper. It's just going to... There'll be fans of both, no doubt, man. If you want to read these comics ahead of time, hit up my Patreon. Patreon.com/EdPiskor. $3 for the archive there, and we're into serializing like a 6th issue at this point, man. Well over 150 pages worth of stuff. What else, Jim?
Subscribe to the Cartoonist Kayfabe e-newsletter at the links below this video. You can also find Cartoonist Kayfabe t-shirts and merchandise, like this Make More Comics shirt, at the links below this video.
Give them those marching orders, man. We're going to be on our way.
Make more comics.